تذكر يوما كنت تعانق دمعة الفكر تناجي الله في صبر وترجو رحمة تسري فعاش القلب إخلاصا وصرت تحوم كالطير تحلق في ثقافات وتنهل من ربى الخير ترى ما زلت تذكرها وتذكر روعة.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وأصحابه وبارك وسلم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Essentially a very simple but universally embracing greeting whereby we beseech the Almighty to send His peace and blessings upon each and every one. Welcome to Sunday Forum, coming to you from the studios based at the Al-Quds Broadcast Center in Gatesville, Cape Town, South Africa. Today we have lined up for you two very relevant and very informative issues. The first one is the amazing journey of two women in the field of Islamic business and finance, and in the second segment of our program today, a review of the acclaimed book Disruption Amplified with author Abdullah Varachia, and that will be hosted by Dr. Syed Parker. So let's get right into it. It is one of the 5 pillars of our beautiful Deen of Islam. Its application is subject to strict Sharia requirements. One of the great success stories in as far as Islamic financial institutions are concerned in our country. At present, both the chairperson of the board as well as the CEO are both ladies, both of whom, by the way, have been ranked 20 and 21 respectively among 300 most powerful businesswomen in Islamic business and finance. With us in the studio today, it's my absolute pleasure, privilege and honor to welcome Fairouz Mohammed, the National Chairperson of SANZAF, as well as Yasmina Franca, the CEO of SANZAF. Ladies, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Sunday Forum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
It's an absolute pleasure to have both of you here today, and on behalf of each and everyone viewing and listening, from all of us, a hearty Mubarak to both of you. Well done.
Shukran.
Fairouz, if I can start with you, the first question, is this the first time that women have headed this important institution in South Africa, both as chairperson and as CEO?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Shukran Uncle Sattar for the question, and it's something that we actually get quite often. I don't know, maybe it's because it doesn't happen very often in South Africa. But the role of the CEO was a new role that was created, more so because the current national office bearers at the time did most of the oversight of the organization. So a lot of the responsibilities fell on us as office bearers, but yet a lot of them, or most of them, have full-time jobs or part-time jobs, or they were just kind of very busy and not doing justice to the work that we actually wanted to fulfill in terms of the organization. So we created a role of a CEO to have oversight and ensure that the strategic objectives of the organization was met. And then Yasmina was the person that was successful in filling the position. And she was the ideal candidate because she, first of all, had operational experience within the organization, because at that time she was the current general manager of Western Cape. Okay. And also she had previous Western Cape board experience, because I think she held the position of a board member for about 10 years before that. So she came with a huge amount of experience just within the organization and within the industry. So we felt that she was the ideal candidate. So it was the first time a CEO was appointed, and it was a female, alhamdulillah. And then from a national chairperson point of view, yes, that role was also the first time for a female to be appointed. And it wasn't just a strategic decision, it was actually based on merit.
Okay, wonderful.
Alhamdulillah. I actually have been involved with the organization for many years, 22 to be exact, but from an executive level has been for about 15 years. about 5 for Western Cape. Well, I'm actually still currently a Western Cape board member, but my position got promoted to National Treasurer, which then obviously made me a National Office Bearer. So I was a National Office Bearer for at least 10 years before I actually became the National Chairperson, and I held the position of National Treasurer as well as National First Deputy, so it was kind of inevitable for me to kind of take over the role as National Chair, so I could actually say that I was groomed for the role, alhamdulillah.
So in terms of hierarchy, you've got a national board and then you've got regional boards as well?
Yes, so the way it works in terms of hierarchy, we have the Board of Trustees, of which the National Executive Board has oversight of the entire country.
Okay.
And then we have regional boards that has oversight to ensure their business plans are met within their specific regions. Okay. And Yasmina then takes oversight of, from an operational point of view, to ensure that all the regional managers perform in terms of their business plans.
So she's the national boss, in other words?
Operationally, yes, she is. So they, all regional managers report to her.
Okay, okay. Yasmina, then that takes me to the next question, which I'd like to pose to you. How do you find, as a woman, executing your job? Is it easy, difficult, or do you just carry on regardless?
Shukran. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Akal Sata, I think I'll go with option C.
Okay.
Just carry on regardless. I think for me the importance is, you know, get my head down and get on with the job. I think Fairuz sketched pretty much what the job entails in terms of oversight and operational management of the entire organization, and that in itself is a task. But one is not insensitive to the fact that the role of the female head of any organization, one has to be sensitive to what that means for other people in terms of the gender issue. And when I say I get my head down and just get on with it, I'm not insensitive to the fact that how do other people experience a female CEO, and my engagement with various stakeholders from different backgrounds, different cultures and all of that, one has to be sensitive to that, and I'm completely mindful of that. And absolutely also the message that we send out as an organization with females in lead position is to say that, you know, there is a role for women in society, in every aspect and every sphere of society. But also we have so many examples in our own history of Islam in terms of women doing pioneering things. And so we must get to learn our history and be proud of
in this particular instance, I think one should be even more prouder, because it is one of the 5 basic principles of the Deen, and headed by 2 ladies. It reminds me of an incident that Mufti Meng mentioned to me. One of the largest mosques in Malaysia has got 1 trustee, and he says that that mosque operates like clockwork every day, and the trustee is a lady.
MashaAllah.
So Fairuz, if I can then pose the next question to you, if you could give us a brief outline of the magnitude, and I'd like to emphasize on the word magnitude, of SANZAF today, its size, the scope, and if you could maybe compare it to the days when it was founded.
Shukran, Uncle Sattar. Okay, I'm very young in terms of when it was formed, in terms of 1974. I think in the humble beginnings of Rustenburg. That's what I've been told.
I think that is the days when Sheikh Faiq Hamildin was involved.
Yes,
Mr.
yes.
Ibrahim Bardeen was involved.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think it actually stems from in terms of the Muslim youth movement,
That's
where they, for example, had a very strong influence in terms of SANZAF. In fact, they were actually the springboard of the formation of SANZAF. And it included all the stalwarts, like you just indicated, Sheikh Faiq Hamildin, Abdul Razak Razak, Ibrahim Bardeen, Iqbal Sabat, very up north, Uncle Ahmed Saeed Mullah, Dr. Shaukat Token. So there are so many. Yeah, Abdul Karim Ghani. So yeah, so if I'm forgetting them, then please they must forgive me.
Yes.
But they were very much involved in terms of the sounding board of the organization. But in terms of its magnitude, if I look at it from today compared to then, SANZAF currently has a distribution capacity of about 170 million, compared to 14,000 Rand in the early days. But even though if you look at that magnitude of capacity in terms of the difference between the two, the stalwarts yet had that foundation of fundamental principles of good corporate governance, you look at operational efficiency, financial management. All those were actually entrenched in the organization then already. So it's not just, for example, we coming on board now as professionals. All we do is we just improve and enhance the good corporate governance that actually existed by the implementation of our stalwarts then, alhamdulillah. And if I look at from a staff maybe complement, now we currently have about 122 staff existing, whereas then there were staff but not as many as now, although obviously the magnitude of the organization is much bigger now. And we may have a CEO currently now ensuring that the oversight of the entire country, but then we also had a national administrator, which was actually Razak.
I remember that.
So even though we still had an oversight of the entire country, just the magnitude was different at the time.
Do you have many volunteers?
Yes, absolutely. Yasmina may be able to explain in terms of exactly how much of volunteers, but I think it stems from, especially from the, I think the Cape Sands of Zakah Fund, where Sheikh Faik Hamildin was quite instrumental in that. I think the volunteers were just in abundance, especially where it started in terms of the Bridgetown Masjid. And they just grew. And currently we have volunteers digitally, we have volunteers all over the country, from young to still the elderly. So alhamdulillah.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. Yasmina, COVID-19.
Yes.
How has it affected your target and performance, and how has it impacted on the destitute? If I can say, how hungry are the hungry at the moment?
So yes, COVID has affected all of us, and I think at the organizational level, multiple levels where we've been impacted. So I think the nature of the work that we do, being a humanitarian organization, so immediately when COVID hit us and we started to feel the impact of what the lockdown, and it was a necessary lockdown at the time. So yes, we always say South Africans' hearts are, you know, they just have good hearts. And so when this happened and the call went out for people to get behind us, we were inundated, alhamdulillah, with assistance and just an outpour of generosity. So from that point of view, absolutely, and we couldn't go into lockdown, so we weren't, the nature of our business, if I could say that, was that we had to find ways to still do our work. So there was a lot of protocols we needed to put in place to remain a very responsible employer, because we had a number of staff members that still needed to go, and because our offices were closed, we needed to go into communities. And that's so PPE and all of those protocols around keeping staff safe, that was another issue. And coming to the need, so naturally we have communities that we service, but there's a sector that was a new sector, and that we could call it the middle income. And those were people who generally survive. We talk about the survival entrepreneurs, the ones, the breadwinners that had these little cafes on the corner, little stalls that they were operating and literally keeping their families going. And that was completely shut down. So we saw a new group of people coming for assistance. And the need was just phenomenal, to the point that now we speak about how hungry is the hungry, and that's an unfortunate reality in South Africa. Currently, we have just in the Western Cape 160,000 meals a month that we put out, which comes to about 5,300 meals a week. And from an operational point of view, it sounds like a lot, but sorry, 5,300 a day. Operationally, it's a lot, but still, there are still people wanting. And so we're going to all these areas from Mitchells Plain to Manenberg to Langa to Gugulet to Lavender Hill, and I can mention quite a few. And your heart still kind of go out to those that you can't help. But we are now in a phase where we start talking about the second wave, and currently where we're at, people, we start talking about a kind of donor fatigue, but even COVID fatigue. But our appeal at this moment in time is that we need that, what we saw at the beginning. We need to see, you know, that outpour of generosity that we saw in April, which was also, alhamdulillah, coincided with Ramadan. But inshallah, you know, we have faith in South Africans. We know their hearts are big, and the queues are long. So inshallah. Inshallah,
inshallah. It reminds me of that beautiful saying, in the hands of those who have lies the haqq of those who don't. And if we can just follow that dictum, inshallah, I'm sure that in as much as we have so many challenges that we will all be able to overcome the challenges. Fairuz, can you give us a brief outline of that organization that conferred this prestigious award to both of you?
Shukran, Uncle Sattar. Okay, so the organization that actually formed this whole report is called Women I, and they founded by Cambridge IFA in the UK. And the way it was actually, the reason why it was created was that they actually have a very similar report dedicated to the male counterparts.
Okay.
And they realized that because of the important role women play in the industry as well, their contributions, there are very many talented women within the industry, they felt that they needed to dedicate the same report but just to women. And that's how this report actually came about. So now they have a Women I report for the 300 most influential women in Islamic business and finance.
Okay. So is it in terms of the 300 people that were on the list, is it globally or just UK and South Africa?
No, it's globally. So
Okay.
you have them in, whether it's China, Indonesia, Malaysia,
All over the world.
UK, all over the world.
Okay,
Yes,
mashallah.
alhamdulillah.
Yasmina, is this the first time that a South African woman or South African women have been recognized?
Yes, I kind of tried to research this, and as far back as I could go, it is for me what I've seen the first time South African women. But you know, traditionally, women from the Middle East and South Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia tend to have dominated this, and I think it's to be expected because they lead the way when it comes to Islamic business and finance. But definitely a first for South African and two women at the same time.
Fairuz, the criteria of how the selection is done, any idea about how they went about with the criteria?
Yeah, they're actually very transparent in their report. So they clearly indicate to the readers exactly how this whole process works. So it's a very formal process in that they have an assessment committee. So basically they assess the influence and leadership of women, whether it's within their work, whether in the sector, in terms of the market industry, as well as in terms of their performance. So what happens then is that the methodology in terms of what they use is based on 3 factors. So it's the advocacy, it's based on professional leadership, and it's based on market industry.
Okay.
That then gets scored and weighed, and then the rank is determined based on that. So you may, for example, have, for example, currently in my ranking as 20, you have 2 women that may be ranked 20. And in Yasmina's ranking, there's 3, because the system pushes out, because you get weighted and scored, that then by methodology it will have a certain
It's a
ranking.
very scientific way of doing it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, mashallah.
So it's not very subjective. They use a method to be able to determine exactly who fits where.
Good. Yasmina, what was the feeling like when the announcement was made, the reaction from your fellow colleagues and the folks at home?
Yes, so I think it was a Friday, it was exactly a week ago. I think I picked up my phone, it was just before 9 in the morning, and one of my colleagues actually posted it. And I saw it for the first time, and I kind of had to make the picture a little bit bigger to see what's going on. And in fact, as I was reading it, the phone was just going. So that was Friday morning. So in fact, I just need to anecdotally share a phone call then what I received from one of our old chairpersons or ex-chairpersons. And he called and he was very excited about the news, and he said, I'm actually going to instruct the executive board to give myself, you an instruction to do something and send out a communication regarding this. Because if I know you and Fairuz, you guys will probably take a modest approach and not do anything about it. But if you get an instruction, you would have to do it, because it's a very proud moment for
Absolutely,
Sansa.
absolutely.
At a personal level, I think the person that I think took to it mostly was my mother, and I think she became very nostalgic. We lost my father 2 years ago, inshallah, may Allah grant him Jannat al-Firdaus. And she became very nostalgic because she thought of what he would have felt at this moment in time, and he was very involved in our careers, myself and my siblings. And there's one thing he always said to us, and that is, I want you to have careers where other people benefit, and to do the best that you can. And I think when she thought of those things, she just thought of him.
All just came back. Must have been a very emotional moment.
It was. She went out and bought me roses.
And your colleagues?
Oh, all very excited. I think at work as well. I think for the first couple of days we kept it kind of, and it was just spreading. I think it's social media just spread.
mashallah.
But professionally, I think mostly I got a lot of comments through the LinkedIn kind of network, and also because internationally, people in the industry, Islamic banking and finance, connect through LinkedIn, and they're wanting to know professionally, what does this mean for SANZAF, and what value can you add that they can learn from? And many of the comments I got was, you know, to that narrative.
Wonderful, wonderful. Ladies, in conclusion, I've got a standard question for both of you. If I can start with Fayrouz, what does this award mean to you, and how is it going to impact your work and ultimately ensuring people fulfill an important pillar of our beautiful deen? I know it's a bit of a mouthful.
Okay, now, I think initially what I can say is that I was very humbled, honored and grateful, but also conscious of the fact that even though the reward is from an individual capacity, it's a team an award, actually, an accolade, and it's a recognition of the team effort of what we do, because nothing we do is in silo.
Sure.
But I think in terms of what it would do for me is that I think now I need to it increases my responsibility, and it continues to serve with proficiency, to learn, unlearn, relearn, serve and inspire. And in terms of from a community perspective or outside of the organization, is that we now need to continue to educate the communities. And we need to make sure that we obviously manage and distribute the zakah that is entrusted to us with efficiency and with excellence. So alhamdulillah, as an organization, we are humbled that we've been recognized for the work that we do, although we don't really need the recognition, but it's pleasing to see that there are organizations that look within the, I mean, we're a very small country compared to the Indonesians that's very established.
Yes, yes.
So we're humbled that we've been recognized for the work that we do, and we have to continue in serving, making an impact, inshallah, so that we can meet the objectives of the third pillar of Islam.
Inshallah. Shall I pose the question again, or?
No, just to add on to that, I think echoing a lot of Fayrouz's sentiments, but for me it's always important for us to remember that the ultimate recognition that we need to seek is the recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because essentially the work that we do is His work in terms of serving the poor. So that's important. And the accolade that, you know, that we've received gives us an opportunity to put zakah in the spotlight, and that's important for us. Because within Islamic business and finance, we've seen that industry and that sector growing in South Africa, which is phenomenal. And we see that spiritual motivation to find Sharia compliant products. And we have to have the conversation of how does that spiritual motivation extend beyond the the ills of riba, looking for contracts that's mudaraba and partnerships and musharaka, all of those concepts that we are now becoming so sensitive to. How do we extend that conversation to the important third pillar of Islam? Because that zakah lives so beautifully within the context of Islamic finance, and it is the ultimate kind of model for where we need assistance right now in our country from a humanitarian perspective and what we are going through right now. So for us, and it means that this is an opportunity to put the spotlight on zakah.
I just want to end the conversation by saying that alhamdulillah, at Masjid al-Quds we've been involved and we've partnered with SANZAF for many, many years, particularly during the month of Ramadan. And for us it's always been a month that we look forward to from many perspectives, but the fact that SANZAF will be there, and that alhamdulillah we do manage to with the team and with all the encouragement that we give to the musallis to raise a substantial amount of money. But what I've learned in the process, and I'd like just to mention this to both of you, is that a lot of young people today, and especially the professional, highly qualified young people, they feel that it is an important aspect of the obligation that they want to discharge, but they want to do it properly. And they look for people and they look for institutions and organizations like yourselves, where they feel that when they part with that money, it's going to be dealt with in the correct way in terms of what the requirements are of the Sharia. And SANZAF I think in many cases is the first port of call for them. Once again to Fairuz Mohammed and to Yasmina Franke, both of them ladies who have done us absolutely proud. The entire community is very, very proud of them. After the break, Dr. Sahir Parker, who will be doing a one-on-one with Abdullah Varachia, the author of Disruption Amplified. Absolutely riveting stuff. Don't miss it.
تذكر يوما كنت تعانق دمعة الفكر تناجي الله في صبر وترجو رحمة تسري فعاش القلب إخلاصا وصرت تحوم كالطير تحلق في ثقافات وتنهل من ربى الخير ترى ما زلت تذكرها وتذكر روعة.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the Sunday Forum. From a group of change makers operating on a global platform to another dynamic young South African making significant strides in terms of global leadership and strategy. Our next guest is an admitted attorney. He has obtained a Bachelor of Law degree as well as a master's qualification in management. He has visited over 60 countries around the world, consulting with thought leaders, business mavericks, corporate giants, especially on the African continent. He has worked extensively with intergovernmental organizations such as the OECD and the CASA in Asia. His latest contribution comes in the form of a book, Disruption Amplified, Reset, Rewire, Reimagine Everything. As South Africa enters the second wave of COVID-19, it remains important to consider where we have come from, what 2020 has meant, and where we are going in 2021. Professor Nick Benedal calls the book a punchy and timely commentary on issues that are of extremely important to our time. To discuss what this means to the average South African and how these shifting global patterns are opening a new world and impacting every individual in this new and shifting context, joined via Zoom by Mr. Abdullah Varachia. Abdullah, thank you for joining us today on the Sunday Forum. Abdullah, before we talk about the book, let us perhaps start by taking our viewers on a journey. Tell us, what is disruption and how is it valuable in terms of global value chains?
Sure, I think it's a fascinating question and something that's really enamored the thoughts and the perspectives of a number of businesses, both in South Africa, but also internationally that I've worked with. It's also a key discussion area at the business school I teach kids. And it's also something that keeps a number of business leaders and academics and even civil society and government leaders up at night. And so we've got to, as you rightly say, talk about what actually is disruption. And perhaps I want to go to the word that has become quite common amongst all of us in the global community called VUCA, a world of volatility, a world of uncertainty, a world of complexity and ambiguity. And that is, to a large extent, a reflection of the last 10 years in the global economy. And so many people often ask me, why is it that all of a sudden we're now talking about this rapid change? We're talking about disruption. We're talking about this world of VUCA. And I'm going to argue that there are 4 or 5 contextual factors that really give rise to why we see the speed of change. I think the first one is we've seen the world become so much more interconnected. The world is much more closer, much more aligned, much more connected with each other at a personal level and at a country level. And there are many reasons for this, right? I think the one is we've got much easier connectivity amongst each other. So many of you who are listening today would probably never have flown about 20 or 30 years ago. And in the last 10 years, we've seen the affordability of airline travel coming through. And also we've seen the accessibility, so many more airlines in the global community. And that's meant that we have a lot more coordination and connection between countries. Secondly, in the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen a rapid increase in terms of multilateralism. Countries trading with each other more effectively, countries working with each other more effectively, countries investing in each other's markets quite extensively. And that's really opened up cross-border opportunities. The third one, and the massive one that's been spoken about, is what we call the 4th industrial revolution, the acceleration of technology and digital. the increased access in terms of the internet and the associated consequences that come with it. And so what we've seen is a rapid rise in terms of automation, in terms of digitization, in terms of using big data, in terms of how people access and utilize the internet. So think back maybe 15, 20 years ago, I was particularly young at the time, but maybe you used an internet group chat called MIRC.
Yes.
If I had to ask you to use that again, you'd laugh and say, not a chance. I mean, we have so much more different ways to connect. We talk on WhatsApp all the time. There are today 42 million WhatsApp messages that get sent every 60 seconds. So the third is technology. And then the fourth one, which is something that we really have to think about, is that we've seen an increase in terms of human enablement towards access to education. So as an example, I'm sure all of you on your WhatsApp groups or your Facebook groups have epidemiologists, you've got data scientists. They have access to how we can think about COVID, but they don't necessarily have the MBCHB qualification because the internet has given access to information. It's given empowerment to individuals. And so those are 3 or 4 big factors together with other macro factors that have really created a much faster, much more connected, and to an extent, a much more disruptive world that we see in the world around us.
Abdullah, you get me thinking now about international textile markets where traditional supply chain models have become rooted in outsourcing, that constant struggle between cheapest price and fastest time to retail stores. Maybe if you can take our viewers and explain how those retailers that have managed to shorten their supply chain times and their delivery times have been the ones that have been successful in this time of global disruption. So tell us briefly, how does disruption benefit consumers?
Sure, 100%. I think there are a few things. I think the first one that disruption does is all of a sudden, in terms of the retail value chain, we have many more options in terms of what we can buy using retail models. So as an example, many of you probably use retail platforms like Take-A-Lot, and in the US they use Amazon, in China they use Alibaba, and so there are many of these. In Nigeria we've got Jumia. There are many retail platforms. Retail platforms by their very essence are designed in such a way that the inventory is not necessarily owned by the actual owner of that platform. And so in event, there are many other entrepreneurs who can place their products onto that retail platform.
Yes.
The consequence of that is that you have a reduction in terms of price. The second consequence of that is that it creates a lot more of an efficient system, because I don't have to go into store to be able to buy my goods and services. I'm able to use a platform to be able to do it. So that's the one.
Yes.
I think the second is a platform like the one we're chatting on now, Zoom, has given us the opportunity for people to work from home. It's given a chance for people to be able to connect with family in various parts of the world using a platform like Zoom. It's given us a chance to be able to bring people from other parts of the world into our living rooms, into our educational institutions. Last week I was teaching an MBA class at Gibbs, and I had a faculty member from Harvard Business School spending some time with us because all of a sudden we so closely connected. And so the reality is that retail has become a lot more frictionless, a lot more easier, and a lot more efficient. And the consequence is that we have so much more access to goods and services. The second is communication and connection, the ability to connect much quicker, much easier using the platform that we have. The third, to the end user that you're talking about, is access to education. All of a sudden, you're able to access models of education in various parts of the world. You're able to do a coding course from MIT. You're able to study robotics at London Business School, all online, and at a much more affordable cost, because we've stripped out all of the major costs that often come about with physically needing to go into an environment. So that's the third. And then the fourth, and something that really excites me, is what we see in terms of telemedicine. The ability to, in the absence of super specialists in certain geographies around the world, to still access those super specialists using telemetry and telemedicine to do that. And so those are 4 examples. There are many others. And for me, I think it's either daunting for many companies who think, I've never seen this type of acceleration, this type of digitization. But I tend to look at it from another perspective. I think it's particularly exciting. It gives us a chance to be able to reimagine the type of society that we want to live in, the type of work that we do. And so let me spotlight 2 examples that are important. I've had a lot of people in the last 9, 10 months that I've been working with around the world in building their strategy or innovation, who keep saying to me, Abdullah, I'm tired of 2020. When do I go back to the new normal? And I laugh and I say, the very nature of calling where we came from normal is misplaced, because where we came from was never normal to start with. It's not normal to live in a society where billions of people go onto the road every day at 7 a.m. or 6 a.m., 6 in Johannesburg, 8 for you in Cape Town, and go onto the road and gridlock traffic, right? Every time I fly on the breakfast flight over Cape Town, I'm alarmed by the highway and the number of cars that we have. And then to get to work 2 hours later, hungry, frustrated, not very productive, and to repeat that process every afternoon. It's not a logical system. It's not normal to live in a society where we've got such massive income inequality and we've got exclusion and we haven't been able to create an inclusive society. And so what COVID has given us is a mass experiment forced on all of us to be able to think about other modalities in which we can see this world and perhaps to paint a different picture. And that for me is exciting.
Now, Disruption Amplified is, number one, beautifully written in simple English. I carried it with me and got through it in about 2 days. The ideas and insights are significant for the changing social and human context that we found ourselves in. Where did the idea for the book come from?
Sure. I was, like all of us, sitting at home on the 27th of March, listening to the president, and as the president announced lockdown, I think it's a period that we'll never, ever forget in our lifetime. It's one of those seminal moments where you remember where you were sitting. It felt like you were in a surreal environment that you had to pinch yourself to say, is this really happening in my world? And I recall in mid-February receiving a call from the head of academics at my business school saying, we as faculty might have to teach online. And I laughed and I said to colleagues around me, this is a Chinese problem. It's not a South African problem. And 3 weeks later, true to the fact, it became a global challenge. And let's be honest, today, it's a challenge in every part of the world. And so on the 27th of March, as the lockdown hit, we then went into this very weird 2 weeks where, many of us learned to now bake banana bread and try and figure out how do we manage our health and start to play board games. And then I received a call from one of the book publishers saying to me, Abdullah, would you be willing to contribute a chapter to a book that I'm putting together with 47 other contributors? And I said, yeah, I'm more than happy to. Got a bit of time on my hands. And then she laughed and said, you promised me your own book for the last 9 to 12 months. And do you think you might have a chance to do that now? And I said, Tracy, I've just had 9 out of 11 of my international trips that were planned for the year canceled. And so it means I've got 9 weeks free at the moment as a consequence of that. So I've got time. And she said, go ahead. And so that's what I did. I spent every morning from 5:30 to about 8:30 before my day started writing, putting pen to paper. I did it at breathtaking speed because, COVID has moved so fast. And so my objective was not to say I have the answers, because I don't think anybody's got the answers, but at least to take a view. And you'll see the book is written in such a way that I've used strategic foresight. I put up some scenarios, and the hope is that at least it gets us a view. So that's the one motivator. The second motivator is I met many companies in the period March to June who I've been working with in terms of my strategy work around the world, who are caught up in the now. They were so paralyzed by the deep impact of this health crisis that they were not looking at the next. And for me, I often say in a crisis, we've got to look at the offensive strategy. We've got to look at how do we proactively adapt? How do we reimagine ways in which we create value or capture value or continue to do our work? And so for me, I wanted this book to at least be a forward-thinking view to say, even though we don't have the answers, which is the caveat I put in the book, we have to find a way to look at the now, but also at the next.
In the foreword, Professor Benadel asserts that to be a good leader and therefore to be strategic and impactful, one needs both a map and a mirror to be particularly, and I found that to be particularly insightful. Please take our viewers through both the reason and the difference of these analogies that have been used.
Sure. I think it's, Nick Benadel is the founding dean at Gibbs Business School, and the two of us work extensively together. And he often uses this beautiful example of, as you say, the map and the mirror. And he argues that in your world, in your personal life, you can think about what is your direction, what is your personal strategy, what is it that you'd like to achieve and what are the interrelated choices that you need to take to be able to achieve that. At a company level, you can do that as well. And even perhaps we argue that you can do this at a country level. But in order to do that, we've got to get a frame of what we call strategic leadership. And Nick Manadel argues that in strategic leadership, we need this map and mirror. So the map is really, what is the destination that I'd like to get to? And so he talks about the environment first. What's going on around us? What's happening outside the company I work for, or the sector I work in, or the school that I'm a part of? And can I leave that environment and understand this environment outside of my limited lived experience? And so he says the environment is either the key enabler or disabler of your ability to make the right type of choices, and your choices must be informed by that environment. And so he says that's a big component of the map. He says the second is to be able to say, based on that environment, where would I like to go to? What is the destination ideally? And you must have the intellectual humility to appreciate that you might not get to that destination. You might get an alternative. But it is important to be able to say that I want to get from Johannesburg to Cape Town, and this is the path that I need to take, and these are the stops that I need to take, and this is the type of fueling that I need to put in, and these are the type of meals that I need to have as part of my pathos. And so he argues that that's important. And he says in the absence of a map, what you tend to do is to go aimlessly, thinking that you're busy, being productive, but without a view in terms of where you're going and how you get there. And then the mirror, which is equally as important, is to be able to look back at self. Is to say it's great to be able to look external and to theorize about what's happening in the country, or some of the challenges, or the potential of a next lockdown, or what we see in the economy, or what we hear about all the time in terms of endemic levels of inequality. But what does it mean for me? What role do I have as an actor in this? What agency do I bring in? How do I contribute in some way? And so he says these are interrelated. It's the external view, but then it's also the internal view of how am I going to play a role in terms of getting to that destination, or at least contributing in some way. And so it's both the map and the mirror that are important.
Now, Abdullah, if we put it out there that steam power represents the start of the first industrial revolution, and then electricity in a certain way telling us that the second industrial revolution has begun. And then similarly, not too long ago, with the advent of the internet, bookmarking the start of the third industrial revolution. You mentioned earlier this notion of the fourth industrial revolution. Why is this so critical for African development, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa?
Sure, I think it's a lovely question. I think, let me start with Martin Luther King, who's famous for saying in his prison cell in Alabama that the danger with revolutions is that the majority of people sleep through them. And if you had to use that as a frame of reference, it's interesting the type of language and terminology that the World Economic Forum uses around these revolutions. And so I think it's important to be able to ask, as you've done so, what is this fourth industrial revolution? And then the adjunct question is, what does it mean for me as an individual living in Cape Town, or in the Western Cape, or in the Eastern Cape, in this country called South Africa in 2020? And how do I then play a role in terms of this fourth industrial revolution? So the fourth industrial revolution was largely postulated initially by the World Economic Forum, who argued that we're at a period where everything is being challenged. And Klaus Schwab, the founder of the WEF, says everything from the way we work to the way we live to the way we relate to one another. And he argues that this is as a result, to a large extent, because of the acceleration of digital. And so maybe let's talk about some practical examples to reflect on this.
Yes.
I think the first one is, often many of you would be familiar with you searching for an item. You happen to hear somebody talking about Mauritius, or maybe I talk about the economic impact of COVID on Mauritius. And so you Google Mauritius on your phone, and for some reason, all of a sudden, all of your stuff on your social media starts to advertise accommodation in Mauritius. What is going on? Well, effectively, society has the ability to use big data patterns to understand your behavioral patterns and to be able to then recommend certain things to you. Small example of how big data is being applied in the social media context. And it's applied in many other ways. As an example, insurance companies are now looking at driver behavior and how drivers drive in a certain way. They can't use it in terms of claims processes, but what they can do is use the anonymized big data to be able to say these are the major causal factors for accidents on the road. So the one is big data. The second one is aligned to that, machine learning, the ability of machines to be able to compute large components of data and to digitize it in a way that we used to, in some cases, do manually. And so you probably see this in terms of some of the work that you do online. So machine learning is a big component. The machine has the ability to learn tasks that otherwise would be done by human beings and does it in a more efficient, more quicker, more faster way. That's the second. I think the third one, which is going to be transformational in the next 5 to 10 years, is the advent of self-driving technology, autonomous technology. In effect, we now have motor vehicles in various parts of the world, including all Teslas that are manufactured, that can drive entirely on their own. What's holding us back is the ability to get legislation to keep up with that. But it does mean that, inshallah, over the next 10 years, we'll have self-driving cars. That will change the nature of roads. And so let's use this one example of self-driving cars. If we use big data and machine learning, cars who are driving on their own on the road would automatically be able to redirect themselves based on traffic patterns because they know where are the major traffic bottlenecks, and they would automatically readjust and reorientate based on that. And what would you do? You'd sit in the back of the car reading a newspaper or sleeping on the way to work whilst the car drives itself and readjusts its route to be able to get there. So that's the third. And then I think the fourth one around the fourth industrial revolution is the issue of artificial intelligence and robotics, the ability to be able to translate some of the functions that would be otherwise done by human beings to bots or to robots. So as an example, simply put, sometimes you phone a call center and you're chatting to somebody who's actually a bot. It's not a human being, but that bot is able to assist you. So it's quite a minefield, but I'm trying to give you 4 very practical examples in terms of the fourth industrial revolution.
Thank you, Abdullah. Now, in addition to your consulting work, that you also have many, shall we call them, passion projects that hold your heart firmly in South African soil. The Collective Genius is one of those projects. Please tell us about the Collective Genius and why is this so important for the future of particularly education in South Africa?
Sure. So the Collective Genius was actually an initiative, when I was in school, I happened to participate in a United Nations program that effectively took me on my first flight to Cape Town back in the day, and then my first flight to New York in my life. And coming out of that, a colleague of mine, Novisa Mayema, and I created this company called the Collective Genius. And what we did was to be able to run massive corporate social investment projects on behalf of a number of companies. So we ran the Anglo-American Sowetan Young Communicators Awards for second language English speakers. And a number of very influential speakers came through this program, people like Mbuyiseni and Dlozi. We ran this Model United Nations program that we benefited from. And then the Collective Genius, together with an NGO I'm a part of and a chair called Education Africa, played a role in it. And so we started running massive youth development programs in the field of leadership development, of speech in the form of debating in the United Nations. And many of these young people ended up going abroad like we did. And many of them have become very influential South Africans, leaders in government, leaders in business, leaders in civil society, leaders in religious institutions. And so it's really been heartening in the last 17, 18 years since my first year of university to have been running this organization, to have seen the impact and to have seen the return. And so I think for me, a big component of why I've been actively involved in the NGO and civil society space through both Education Africa and the Collective Genius has been because I think we've got to take the impact that we've had and the benefit that we've been able to gain in this democratic country and to be able to find a way to pay it back. And sometimes we often defer that responsibility to government or to leaders. And I think that's unfair. I think it's a collective responsibility, and all of us in some small way can have an impact. And as we hear about the butterfly effect, our small impacts have a collectively larger impact. And so the reality is we all have a role that we can play, and I think we should play that role.
Certainly, Abdullah. Now, just back to the book, and in one of the chapters, you make specific mention about the significant change that's about to happen in terms of interpersonal relationships. Now, as a social scientist, I'm quite taken by this idea. How do you think that the changing society that we live in, both in terms of its social and technological changes, will impact the world of dating and marriage?
So I think one of the reasons I put that in was because I argue in the book that what COVID has resulted in, and as you started, even before COVID, we were on this trajectory of disruption. It has resulted in what I call this cognitive rewiring of human behavior, that human beings are being quickly rewired in terms of how they connect with society, how they buy goods and services, how they work with each other. So let's use two simple examples. And once you adopt a different way of doing things, it's very hard to get back. So listeners, think about the day when you had a BlackBerry phone with a QWERTY keyboard that was physical in nature. At that time, I promise you, somebody might have come to you and said, would you be interested in a touchscreen phone? And touchscreen seemed so impossible to use that you said, no, I love my BlackBerry and my BBM. Today, if I have to reverse that, and if I have to give you a BlackBerry phone with a QWERTY keyboard, you'll say, I just can't use it. It's too difficult. What has happened? You've adopted, right? Smart screen technology has become more affordable because it's mass adopted. And then secondly, it's become ubiquitous to the point that you can't go back. So in the same way, so much of the new adoptions will become ubiquitous and will become the way in which we become accustomed to doing things. So let's use three examples on this. In 1990, if you had to go out for dinner or for lunch, you had three options: Mike's Kitchen, The Spur, or Wimpy. And those were your options, and you'd actually dress up and go out to go and have that meal. Today, you have thousands of options to the point that it's difficult for you to leave your couch to go to the door to collect the food from the Uber driver. What has happened? It's been cognitively rewired, right? And so the same way, and the big argument I have is what COVID has taught us is that this is not a digital shift. Digital is merely the enabler. The most successful individuals and companies are those who can get the nexus between the digital and the social scientists. We need more social scientists, more human behavior experts, more sociologists and psychologists. And what being locked up for many people has taught is the value of human connections, coming together, working in a similar space, being able to share ideas, being able to watch people even though you're not formally learning from them, but seeing how they do things, how they speak, how they engage, how they work, how they connect with clients, how they do deals, how they sell, how they buy. And that we missed quite a bit of. And so in my view, the next 10 years are not going to be the success of those who can acquire digital skills only. They're actually the most valuable skills in the next 5 to 10 years are going to be those skills that can't be digitized and automated. And what are those skills? They're skills that we never were taught at schools and university. Skills like curiosity, skills like empathy. Can I step in the shoes of somebody else? Skills like problem solving, skills like adaptive leadership in uncertain contexts, because it might be COVID today, it's going to be something else tomorrow. And so we must be comfortable with that ambiguity. Skills like ideation. And so these are skills that can't be digitized, they can't be automated. And so as a result, they'll become so much more valuable. And that is, I think, what we must bring into our homes, into our classrooms, into our workspaces, is to embrace a lot more of getting young people and even older people to be more curious, more empathetic, more imaginative in the way they see the world, because we can digitize skills that we can replicate, but we can't digitize imagination and problem solving, and we need more of that.
Definitely. You make specific mention in the book of some sectors of the economy that will see significant change as a result of COVID-19. These include healthcare, travel, entertainment, and property. How will each of these need to, as you say, proactively adapt to the changing world?
Sure. So let's start with healthcare. I think what we've seen in the healthcare environment, and it's particularly important for South Africa, 83% of South Africans are dependent on public healthcare. It's only 17% that have the privilege of access to a medical insurance or access to private healthcare, which means that we've got astronomical private healthcare and really overburdened, overstretched public healthcare. And so what COVID has meant is a push by government to be able to start to think about what are the modalities of universal healthcare. Can we start to see the sharing of resources as we've done in COVID between hospital chains, both in public and private, and how do we do that? The second is we've seen the explosion of digital tools and analytics as an enabler. So a company that I've been working with has incredible tools to be able to geolocate within a 1 square kilometer radius what are, the major healthcare conditions in this area, what are the hospital requirements, what are the pharmaceutical interventions that are needed here. And based on that, we are a lot more clever in terms of being able to deliver the right type of medication, being able to provide the right type of clinical interventions, being able to determine which type of healthcare practitioners should be in the clinic that surround this area, because these are the major healthcare conditions. So One Healthcare will go through a massive tech revolution where analytics becomes the enabler and we're a lot more pointed in terms of interventions that we can make. And secondly, I think we're going to see the push for universal healthcare. It's going to be a long, a difficult, and a painful process, but I think it's a process that we've got to embrace and think about.
Yeah.
The second is travel, and I think the airline sector is going to go through its own painful period. As an example, I sit on the board of a company out in the UK, and so once a quarter I go across for a board meeting. And in the last 3 board meetings that we've had them all virtually. And we've now taken a decision as a company that travel internationally, even post-COVID, will be a lot more environmentally difficult because of the impact of so much air travel on the environment. It doesn't make sense from a cost perspective because we can do this virtually. And thirdly, it's just more efficient. Before I used to take the 10 p.m. flight out of OR Tambo into Johannesburg, sleep on the plane, shower at Heathrow and go into the city. I no longer need to do that. Yeah. So we'll start to see not the end of international travel, but we'll see it when it's longer and when it's justified. So that will change the modalities of travel. And then thirdly, I think we're not going to go back to full physical in the office space. We're going to see a hybrid model. Yeah. So a large company I'm working with in Amsterdam has taken a decision. They used to have 17,500 seats at their head office. We now have moved to a space where we've done density and health insights. We've looked at the type of modeling when we need certain teams to come in. We acknowledge that people must come into a physical space to work with each other and to connect, but not all the time. Yeah. And so now we've gone to a stage where we've renegotiated leases. We only need 4,500 seats at the head office because we work on a zoom in, zoom out approach. So that means work rewired will change. Companies are starting to appreciate that I don't need location-specific skills. Yeah. I could have global skills who work for me. So I could have a coder from Pakistan who's doing 4 days of work with me. I could have a designer designing something for me from Budapest. And I could do something in terms of payment technology with somebody out in Silicon Valley. I don't need to have the person physically with me. I could do the work virtually with them. And that opens up a global skills opportunity that comes in. So that's the third. And perhaps for me, the last sector that's particularly important and relevant is the education sector. I think we're going to move to a hybrid model of education, some physical, some digital, as we call phygital in the world. But I think we're also going to appreciate that in a world where nobody has the answers, no president, no prime minister, no CEO, no business school professor, then we have to start empowering ourselves with the skills to be able to navigate a lot better. And that means that this dogma that you study until the age of 24 and work for the rest of your life is archaic and doesn't work. You have to learn all the time, and you have to learn on a daily basis. And learning doesn't only happen in formal institutions, you learn everywhere. You learn from driving new routes to work. You learn from talking to people who are different to you. You learn from eating different food. You learn from traveling. You learn from speaking to people who have a different worldview as you. And so I think education is going to be particularly exciting.
Absolutely fascinating discussions. Today on our program, attorney, educator, business consultant, strategist and author, Mr. Abdullah Varacha, author of the new book, Disruption Amplified, available at all good bookstores nationwide. We'd like to specifically thank Mr. Solly Noor for arranging the interview with Abdullah. And Abdullah, once again, thank you for making the time to talk to us, and we look forward to hosting you on yet another edition of the Sunday Forum.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you to author Abdullah Varacha and Dr. Syed Parker, sharing the essence of that absolutely valuable book, giving us a very deep insight into what a post-COVID-19 future holds for each and every one of us. Before we go, just a very quick announcement that the next program that will take place on the 27th of December, we'll be having a panel discussion where we'll be going through and talking about some of the major events of the year 2020. That should be a full 1-hour program on Sunday Forum. Don't miss that. And also, as we bring the curtains down, thank you to Siraj Parker, Samir Parker, Anwar Umar Rumane, and our young Hafiz Bilal Mahdi, who does the final editing for Sunday Forum. Also, special thanks to all the participants on today's program. A note of appreciation to Rosie's for the beautiful stage decor, and Nisa Gaby for the artwork. Until we meet again on the 27th of December, I bid you Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
تذكر يوما كنت تعانق دمعة الفكر تناجي الله في صبر وترجو رحمة تسري فعاش القلب إخلاصا وصرت تحوم كالطير تحلق في ثقافات وتنهل من ربى الخير